he was having to say, what he had to say was actually the fulfillment of what they were already looking for, that they had believed and longed for. And he also had to show that he and his believers and followers were living according to his teaching, because if you say one thing and do another, people are apt to not necessarily believe what you have to say. If you condemn somebody for living the same way you're living, people are apt not to believe what you have to say. And so that was the thing about Christ, was he lived what he taught. And he taught his followers to live what he taught. And so we're commanded as his children, as God's children, to live as Christ taught. And so, and he talked about he's come to fulfill the law, not to condemn the law, and fulfill the law and prophets. And the audience that he was talking to would have known exactly what he was talking about. So as Christ held these two things together and at the forefront of his ministry, as he begins to talk about the world says this, but I say this, he carries a little more weight with what he has to say because he's actually living that teaching. And so as we move through, we find that he's basically, and not basically, but he's just straight up calling Israel to act as God has called Israel to act from the very beginning. God set Israel apart to be a light. They need to be a light. God set Israel apart to be the salt of the earth. They need to be that salt. And so at this point, Israel was acting just like everybody else. And so he's trying to push forth those things. So Christ wasn't and had no intention of abandoning the law and the prophets. Israel's whole story, all the commands, the promises, and all was coming true, coming to fruition. It's coming true in him. So now, Christ has come to make this covenant a reality. And so that's where we're at this time. Christ is living the way he's preaching the way we should live. And so we know that Christ was the salt of the world. Absolutely. And they were muddled up, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So and a lot we find with what Christ was teaching is a change of attitude, a change of mind, a different focus, a different way to look at things, and a different way to live from what they had been living, a different example to follow than the examples they had to follow with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And so he was the salt of the earth and the light of the world. He was set upon a hilltop. He was crucified for all the world to see, becoming a beacon of hope and new life for everyone, drawing people to worship his Father, embodying the way of self-giving love, which is the deepest fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so where this takes us today, as we live in the society that we live in, we're also to be the salt. We're also to be the light. But we tend to mix it with other things. We tend to mix it with other attitudes. We tend to shade the light and not use as much salt. Just because of the society we live in and the culture we have. And just as in Jesus' time, that's not how we're supposed to be. Okay, as you look at the world's view of Christianity, and we're going to use that as a loose term, the world finds, by good measure, that the church, Christianity, is hypocritical. When you preach one thing and do another, that's hypocritical. A lot of times, that's the life that the religious world leads, and those that are not part of the religious world are not dumb by any stretch of the imagination. They're not blind by any stretch of the imagination. They see what goes on. And so, and it's not easy. It's not easy. It was never supposed to be easy. So, in order to fulfill what the life that Christ wants us to live, to glorify His Father, to our Father, is not easy. And but He gives us examples. He gives us a way. It's not like He tells us to do something and then just drops it. He lets us know that it is possible because we have His example of the life He lived to emulate. And so, as we move on to chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, I'm probably going to read, I may not. I got a lot. So, you heard that it said of the ancient people, you should not murder. Anyone who commits murder should be liable to judgment. But I say that everyone who's angry with his brother should be liable to judgment. Anyone who uses foul and abusive language will be liable. And anyone who says, you fool, will be liable. So if you're coming to the altar with your gift, and there you remember that your brother has a grievance against you, leave your gift right there in front of the altar, and go first and be reconciled to your brother. Then come back and offer your gift. Make friends with your opponent quickly while you are with him in the street, in case your opponent hands you over to the judge and the judge to the officer, and you find yourself being thrown in jail. I'm telling you the truth. You won't get out until you've paid everything back. All of those instances, we can find that when I read that, that's speaking to somebody else, okay? Because I'm not going to commit murder. I've never thought about committing murder. Never really crossed my mind to commit murder. But there will, in my lifetime, come instances when I have something against someone else, or someone else has something against me. That's just part of living life on the earth. And it's not always so cut and dry, okay? Because I've been known to say things that may be taken as offensive to someone else when there was no intention of being offensive in any way, shape, or form. It has actually happened here that something that I said was misconstrued, and it was explained easily, and it was explained quickly, and nothing came of it. But I can see how those kind of things can affect our relationships with our brothers and sisters. It can affect our relationships with those in the world, and those are the kind of things that I think have more of a purchase with us, because those are the things that can happen. Even my kids, when they were little, somebody said something that somebody said something that somebody said, and what do I think about that? Okay, well, I've always been of the opinion you just go ask the person. it doesn't hurt my feelings if somebody told me that Dale said something. And I'm just going to use Dale as an example. Somebody told me that Dale said something, and it either was offensive or it offended them, or and we need to remember, just because we're offended doesn't mean we're right. Okay, so if it offended them, well, I would go to Dale, and I would probably take the person with me, and I would ask Dale, well, what did you mean when you said, or did you say, and what did you mean by it? And I'm going to say that most of the time, and I don't know what the percentage rate is, but it's high, most of the time what was said was misconstrued, misheard, misunderstood, or right. Why would you do that on purpose? They get hurt easier. That's exactly right. Depending on your mood or your attitude or what else has been going on in your world, there's a chance that you may be offended more easily than others. One of the boys said that somebody said that a member of this congregation had said something foul. We'll just call it foul. And I said, well, let's just go ask him. And he said, what do you mean, Dad? I said, well, if somebody said something that was offensive or vulgar, or not only do we need to find out if that was the case, but it may help them to know that we know. You know, they may not talk that way if they know that. Yeah. I'm sorry, I missed it. Well, and that may be the case too, but that, you know, it's just it makes it easier than just letting it stew. You know, just letting those things stew. If I develop an opinion of one of my brothers based on something that somebody else said that may not be true or may have been misconstrued, that's on me. I think, that can definitely be my fault. And so I don't want that to be the case. I don't want to have ill feelings against my brothers and sisters. I don't think that's the way we should live. And so, there's examples in the world that we have that wars have been started and fought over things similar to that. Say an accident happens and a member of the family, this family, may happen to, the Hatfields and McCoys is a good example, but an accident may happen that this person of this family dies. So this family, in retribution, is going to kill one of these, and maybe two. And in retribution for that, it's going to go back and forth, and it's going to be, and when it could have all been avoided from the very beginning. And anytime we find ourselves mired in something like that, mired in the world, we can always, again, as a general rule, look back and see that one apology or one forgiveness or one taking responsibility for our actions could have eliminated that whole thing.
Started talking to them, they didn't even know why it started.
Nobody even knew. That's exactly right, and that's the kind of situation we find ourselves in. So, yes, sir.
Finally, after she approached me and asked me about it, because I brought up the church something with me. And come to find out, I wasn't even involved. It was somebody else.
It wasn't even you.
Come to me, there's a reason the Bible says that you have all go to them.
And they do. And Brother Ed, we're going to mention this a little bit. They were commanded to leave their sacrifice at the altar. So the reconciliation with their brother was more important than worship at that moment, in that particular thing. Okay? And we can see that if somebody has something against us, our worship is not going to be what it should be. And so reconciliation, and even if it's reconciliation that's based on misinformation or misunderstanding or any of that kind of thing, is a foundation for how we live together as a family, and how we coexist, and how we shine God's light in the community, and how we protect each other and nurture each other, and grow in love for one another as Christ would have us to do. It's just the psychologists will always talk about communication. It's all, it's a breakdown in communication, or it could be solved with communication, or one of those kind of things. And why we have never been better at communicating, I don't know. Failure to communicate, and that's exactly right.
Your example was pretty true about each one killing each other off. But if you think about it, spiritual death is happening.
Absolutely, and it is, and if our actions cost the soul of another individual, I think the scriptures say that that's going to have an effect on us. We're going to stand before God with that on our conscience and on our record, or that is going to be counted against us. So we need to be careful for that. And talking about being angry, it doesn't really, I say apply. I'm not an angry person. I very seldom get angry. I never found. I had a teacher that happened to be an elder at a church, but he taught me in college, and he said something one time that this has stuck with me, and I've forgotten a lot of stuff, but I never forgot this. Was if you get angry with someone or at someone for something they've done, all you have done is handed them the control over your emotions. You've just said, here you go, you made me angry, and so you've just handed them that control. And I try to avoid that. So I don't have a trouble with anger, but we can see how the process of anger folds out. So, and this can apply, but if the way anger rolls downhill, if the executive yells at the boss, well, then the boss is going to yell at the secretary, and the secretary is going to yell at her kids, and the kids are going to yell at the cat, and it just all it swarms around. Where if maybe the executive was mad for a good reason, if the boss would have taken responsibility for whatever it was and didn't allow himself to get angry, then we eliminate the whole rest of that story. And so we can eliminate the rest of that story by our behavior, by our attitude, and by acting in a way and behaving in a way that Christ,
Supervisor that said that as a boss, you got to be able to read people.
right.
When you clock in in the morning, you got to know what to say. Maybe he had a fight with his wife before he left home.
Yeah. And there's all those extenuating circumstances, and it goes all the way back to the core. If you just love that person, you'll recognize that there's a problem, you know. And so you won't let all of that stew. And so, and that's the thing. Part of human maturity is learning to recognize anger and deal with it at its core and those kind of things. And before it gets out of control. And so we can see that most of us are not very mature. If that's a sign of maturity, you know, a lot of us are not very mature. And so part of becoming mature takes work, you know. Anger management is not an easy thing. Recognizing your triggers and all of those things, it's a difficult thing. And so when we talk about anger and the things it leads to, you know, we can push to the other extreme to murder. You know, I don't, you know, there are instances, obviously, of crazy people, but murder is an extension of that anger, I think. And so, and the commandment not to murder is not like kids will push that envelope right up to the very end, you know, is not to stop your anger at the point of murder and not murder someone, and then you followed that commandment. You know, you didn't murder. The point that you should never get near enough of that thought that you wish anybody was dead. And so like I said, that eliminates the bottom half of that. And one of the things I alluded to a little bit earlier, we decide, okay? We decide where our anger takes us. We decide from the very beginning whether or not to be angry. You know, that's something that we decide. Now, we may have never trained ourselves that we can handle that particular situation of anger, you know, to quell that anger or not be angry at all. But we get to decide whether or not to act contrary to have what God would have us to act, how Christ has taught us to act. We belittle ourselves with that anger. You know, there's careers, you know, as far as even in the, you know, the corporate world, but as far as in the entertainment world, there have been careers that have been crushed by one outburst of anger that could have been easily, you know, dealt with, and that have ruined people's lives and careers in that particular avenue of entertainment. So what do you do instead of being angry? Well, the scriptures tell us to make friends with your enemies. Be nice to them. Be reconciled. Make friends. Sounds really simple. Sounds really simple. Just make friends. Not as simple as it sounds if you just use that one statement. Yeah, just make friends with your enemies. Yeah, it's easy. It's not easy. It's difficult, and it's not cheap. Okay, it's difficult and it's not cheap. That's how they talk about going to court, and you know, if they want your shirt, you give them your jacket too. You know, and I read there was an interesting thing. He said, if you owe someone something, and they take your shirt and you give them a cloak, and that's the only two things you had. So you've given them everything. That's not a that was an instance where you're causing the person that's suing you to be embarrassed at your nakedness. Okay, and so not only was it, you know, that's what you should be willing to do, but in that case, it would embarrass the one that's taking everything you have, and perhaps that would change their attitude towards the reason you're in court to begin with. It was just So the point's that if you have to live day by day in a way that when you do come to worship, there's no anger between you and your neighbor, your sister, your brother. There's no anger within you that would take away from your communing with God. And, to a lot of people, that would be a huge achievement. That's a goal, that's an achievement, it's an accomplishment. That's something that somebody has overcome to get to the point where they can worship their God in peace. And so it's not easy. It's not cheap. It takes the hard things in life. Humility. That's not an easy thing. Being able to admit you're wrong. Loving someone that you don't find lovable. All of those kind of things are the attributes that it takes to do that sort of thing. Okay? And we have to remember that if we had those attributes from the beginning, we wouldn't be in that situation we were in to begin. We wouldn't be yelling at the cat. We're already forgiven our boss, and so we're all the way up there. So, yeah, that's exactly right. So, chapter 5, verse 27 through 37. You've heard, Jesus continues, that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who gazes at a woman in order to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye trips you up, tear it out, throw it away. It's better for you to have one part of your body destroyed than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand trips you up, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to have one part of your body destroyed than your whole body go to hell. It's also said if someone divorces his wife, he should give her a legal document to prove it. But I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife, unless it's in connection with immorality that makes her commit adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So you've heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall give to the Lord what you promised under oath. But I say to you, don't swear at all. Don't swear by heaven, that's God's throne. Don't swear by earth, it's God's footstool. Don't swear by Jerusalem, it's the city of the great king. Don't swear by your head, you can't make one hair of it turn white or black. But when you're talking, say yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no. Anything more than that comes from the evil one. I don't have a lot of experience with oaths. You could consider your wedding vows, I guess, an oath. But other than that, your kids, I promise, Dad, I promise. That's not necessarily an oath. I don't live my life in that realm. But I do like the teaching that yes is yes and no is no. It makes it so simple for me because all the extraneous ifs go away. And this doesn't really have anything to do with an oath, but when the kids were in school, I loved texting. Texting was my favorite thing because my youngest son always had something going on, always had to do this and do that. And so he would lay out this dissertation at text of why and where we're going to go do this and we're going to go do that, and I've got to get this and I've got to get that, and we're going here and we're going there, and I want to do this and I want to do that, and I need money for this and I need money for that, and just go and go and go and go and go. And old Dad would say, no. It was brilliant, just my no was just no. It was just that simple. And so I like that aspect of yes and no. You find that in the society that we live in, we don't have a lot to do with yes and no. But we do have a lot to do with whether our yes and no is actually truthful or not. And so I think that's kind of where my mind went when I started studying about oaths and things like that. Making a promise or telling a lie or those kind of things, then your yes is not necessarily yes, and your no is not necessarily no, and so it muddles the thing. It muddles things up, and so as we think about that, the things that come from that. Are not necessarily the outcome that we would rather have. They talk about liars always get caught, and all those kind of things. We just can't let those sorts of behaviors become part of who we are and what people know us for. People should know that if Wayne says yes, there should be no other question. That's yes. If Wayne says no, there should be no other question. That just means no. And so we don't necessarily live in that kind of society, but if our yes is yes and our no is no, it takes care of a lot of those things that can happen in our lives.
People start out by saying, honestly.
Absolutely. To tell you the truth. Yeah, we have those prequels to whatever we're going to say, because not necessarily everything they may have said is the truth. And so throughout that whole chapter, throughout this whole place, Jesus is not just giving moral commands. Okay, he's not just giving moral commands. Do this. Okay, he's unveiling a whole new way of life. It doesn't seem new to us. It just seems difficult to us. But the people he was talking to at the moment would have considered it a completely new way of life. What do you mean, love your enemies? That takes away the definition of enemy, doesn't it? And so it was a difficult time, but Jesus himself invites us to follow him in all of the examples that he left us for that reason. So, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, don't use violence to resist evil. Instead, when someone hits you on the right cheek, turn the other one. When someone wants you to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your cloak. And when someone forces you to go a mile, go a second. Give to anyone who asks. Don't refuse someone who wants to borrow from you. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for people who persecute you. That way, you'll be children of your Father in heaven. After all, he makes the sun to rise on bad and good, sends rain on the upright and the unjust. Look at it like this. If you love those who love you, do you expect a special reward? Even tax collectors do that, don't they? And if you only greet your own family, what's so special about that? Gentiles do that, don't they? You must be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. Okay? And I like this story because it kind of applies to me, but there's a father who had to go away from his young family for 3 or 4 days and had to go away on business. So he's talking to his young son, about 9 years old. He says, listen, when I'm away, I want you to think what I would do normally around the house and do it for me. Of course, he's talking about cleaning up the kitchen and washing dishes and putting stuff away and all that kind of thing. But on his return, he asked his wife what his son had done. She said, well, very strange, she said. Right after breakfast, he made himself another cup of coffee, went into the living room, put on some loud music, and read the newspaper for half an hour. So the son's obedience was, it was spot on. His son's obedience was spot on. The dad's mindset about what he does was skewed just a little bit. So we're supposed to watch our Father, watch our examples, and those are the things we're supposed to do. Okay? And so our example is not making coffee and reading newspapers. Our example is loving the unlovable, taking care of the poor, just being nice, loving each other, loving our enemies.
I always thought it was interesting that he didn't say, I know humans can't really do this, but try to be perfect.
Right. He didn't say that at all. We have an example in Christ of how we're supposed to be, and our focus should be getting there.
And we do the same thing. We make concessions in areas of our own lives. I'm as guilty as anybody is justifying something, trying to justify something in Christ.
Absolutely. We're gonna try the best we can, Personal Bible study at times is more fervent when we're looking for a way to justify what we want to do. Okay? If I can just find it, I know it's in there. He'll let me. I know he will. If I can just find it, may not be in this version, but I'll look at a different version and see if I can just find it. Then I'll be good to do what I want to do and condemn others for what they're doing. That's what I'm looking for. And that's I don't know if that's human nature. I don't know if that's just the way we're wired, but I do know that that's not right. And I do know that I do it just as much as everybody else, because the things that I do have trouble with, those are the things I ignore. The things that Rick has trouble with, those are the things I focus on. I'll shine a light on that, because if the light's on him, I can be over here in the darkness doing whatever it is that I feel like I need to do. So, and the human's attitude towards that is flawed because we try to define what perfect is, okay, in our own circle, what's good for others may not be good for us. What the world considers good, green beans is always my example. It's always my example. The world considers green beans good. Out of my wheelhouse. I don't understand it. I don't like it, but I'm not going to condemn Ed because he does like green beans, and I would just hope that he doesn't condemn me because I don't. And that does make sense. Sermon on the Mount isn't just about us. If it was, we might admire it as a bit of idealism, but we'd then return to what our normal lives look like. Okay? Sermon on the Mount is about Jesus himself. This was the blueprint for his own life. He asked nothing of his followers that he hasn't faced himself. And in his own life, we can already sense a theme that will grow larger and larger until we can't miss it. But if this is the way to show what God is really like, and if this is the pattern that Jesus himself followed exactly, Matthew is inviting us to draw the conclusion that in Jesus we see the Father, the God with us in person, Emmanuel. The Sermon on the Mount isn't just about how to behave, it's about discovering the living God in the loving and dying Jesus. and learning to reflect that love ourselves into the world that needs it so badly. Okay? The Sermon on the Mount is an example for us to live like Christ. To be the light of the world, not to shine on the evil of the world, which is a lot of times that's what we think, and that's maybe part of it, but the light of the world to bring a light to those that are kind of bumbling around in the darkness and haven't found their way, to show them the way. That's kind of like what light does. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why it's there. That's why that goal is there for us to strive for. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And there's no question about that. And like I said, our definition of perfect may be different than the Scripture's definition of perfect. But the Scriptures tell us to strive to be like Christ, to be like Christ, to follow Christ's example. And the Scriptures don't say that, oh, it's easy. If you just do this, it's no problem. There won't be any persecution. It won't cost you anything. You just walk through life in this haze of goodness. Okay? It doesn't work that way. We have that example of how that life and what that life cost Christ. What did that perfect life cost Christ? Everything. Okay? And so that's the example of our perfection. Okay? The life we lead towards perfection should cost us everything. And that's what Matthew's talking to us about. So thank you so much for your time and I cannot believe we got through that.